Hey friends, welcome back to Pastors' Wives Tell All. Today, we get to chat with our friend, Kristen Strong. Kristen is the author of several books, including Girl Meets Change and Desperate Woman Seeks Friends. She also compiled the 90-day devotional, Praying Through Loneliness, that one of us got the opportunity to contribute to. She writes as a friend walking alongside you in your lonely season to a more helpful, hopeful destination. She loves sharing laughs, long talks, and meaningful stories with family and friends while holding a cup of strong black tea. She and her U.S. Air Force veteran husband, David, have 3 beloved adult children. Together, this military family zigzagged across the country and one ocean before settling in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In our episode today, we talk about the difficulty of finding real friendship, real relationships through vulnerability in the church. This struggle seems compounded when you are a pastor's wife. So we discuss the ins and outs of the struggles that we face and how we can know that we are not alone when we're lonely. So let's get to this important conversation.
I'm Jessica.
I'm Jenna.
And I'm Stephanie.
And you are listening to Pastors' Wives Tell All,
a podcast by pastors' wives for church leaders and anyone desiring to take a peek inside our glass house.
We are breaking down walls and crushing pastors' wives stereotypes within the church.
We want pastors' wives and other ministry leaders to know that they are not alone in this. Plus, this is basically therapy for the 3 of us with a whole lot of dance parties. Woo, woo.
Hello, Kristen. It is so good to have you on the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I love y'all and I love your ministry.
Well, we love you, and we got to meet you in person at our writers retreat with our agent, Mary Demuth.
Shout out to Mary.
Woo, woo,
Yes.
woo.
I love how Mary has just brought so many of us together in our ministries. You know?
Yeah, she's great at that. She's a great connector.
She
Yes,
is. She's beautiful.
That's so cool. Well, and you are one of the sweetest women like we've ever met. Like, you were just precious while we were there with you, and just hearing your heart for so many things, for friendship and just for God. So this is going to be super cool.
And that is when Tina came out for the first time. And Kristen was so kind to me and said that she thought I was just funny.
Yeah.
That I was not over the top.
Right.
Does Kristen know
but
about
I
Tina?
was. No, I don't know that Kristen knows that we named her Tina. My alter
I am
ego.
unaware of
Not
Tina.
you.
No.
We
Yes.
named Stephanie's alter ego Tina.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes. So I get when I get nervous, I get overly excited. And
Do you
silly.
remember? Hold on. I want to see if she remembers. Do you remember being around the table that night and Stephanie holding her glass? Cheers. Cheers. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that, but I feel like when I'm together with my friends, we're goofy that way too. So I just was like, well, I'm just at home probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you were very kind. You're like, you're so funny. And I was like, thank you.
Oh my goodness.
No, that doesn't stand out to me now. Like, I don't remember it, but I do remember thinking that y'all were real fun. Like, collectively and individually, you were real fun. So
I wasn't a whole lot of fun that night, but
you were the next day.
I was the next day.
Yeah, she was sick that first night.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's true. I guess, over the whole event, I remember.
Yes, for sure.
Y'all being just a great group of gals. So,
thank you. Well, we're excited to be able to hear all things Kristen today. So, for those that do not know who you are, can you just share a little bit about your family, ministry, and what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I am Kristen Strong. I live in Colorado Springs now, and we've lived there for a number of years now. But for the first 20 years of my marriage, or almost 20 years, I was a military spouse. I met my husband at Oklahoma State. Go Cowboys! And and he was transferring he had been enlisted on the enlisted side of the house, and he was going through ROTC to get on the officer side of the house. So after he graduated, we married. And then I transferred schools as a senior because at colleges as a senior, which,
Yeah.
worked for us in general. Not a great idea because it's, kind of weird credit wise, but it worked for us. And so then began my life of a real big contrast from, I grew up on like this, my street name was literally O'Neill Lane and my last name was O'Neill, as was everybody's last name on O'Neill Lane.
Oh.
And so
Okay.
I grew up, very different. I grew up in out in Osage County, Oklahoma, very much so surrounded by family and friends. I never really had to do much to work to make friends until I went away to that new college. And then afterwards, as a military spouse moving frequently, it was just a whole different ball game. And so I would say that's kind of the first 20 years of my life are defined by being a military wife. And now I still love to champion military spouses, military families. But we've lived in Colorado Springs now for, it's actually been it'll be in this summer, 15 years, which is a long time. I mean, so, but my husband and I have 3 children. We have twin sons who are 25. And then we have a younger daughter who's actually studying abroad this semester in Spain. So I have children hither and yon.
Wow.
I know.
Y'all are a traveling kind of family.
Yes. Thank y'all just for serving, not just your husband, but also we know that's the whole family. So thank you for just loving our country well. And now your son is in the military, which is so cool. So we're grateful for him as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful for him too.
I have a random, unrelated question for you. Are your twin boys, are they identical?
They are very fraternal. Yeah. They were just brothers born at the same time. One's a blonde, one's a brunette.
Twins fascinate me. Like I've always been so fascinated with twins. So anytime somebody tells me they have twins, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. It's just cool to me.
Yeah. It was a time. I mean, I was a baby when I had him. I got pregnant at 24, had him at 25. So anyway, but yeah, they're great boys, great sons.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, Kristen, we're going to jump right in. So we all know that church ministry can be very lonely, right? And one of the biggest struggles that pastors' wives that we've met over the years have said is they've experienced this loneliness, struggling to find real, true friendship, and which is so hard. And loneliness we know is common, but we do find that we have heard from so many pastors' wives, we feel like it is compounded with pastors' wives and people who are in ministry. But thankfully, you have seen the need and you have compiled and written some resources that are helpful for us as we go through this loneliness. So tell us how you've experienced loneliness in your own life.
I would say the first time was that stark contrast of moving from small town Oklahoma to the Dayton, Ohio area. And it felt like it might as well have been the moon because I did not know anybody. And that is the first time I'd ever, experienced not just not knowing anybody, but not knowing everybody. Like I just knew everybody growing up. Even when I went to college, a lot of people from my town went to that college. So I would say that was the first time, and really figuring out or having this realization that I did not know how to make friends. And my husband was also then traveling all the time for his job. And so, that was probably the first time it was like a hard introduction into loneliness, like just being, not having any people around that, that felt familiar. So I would say that was the first learning curve. And then just really kind of every few years, having to start your community again from the ground up and figure that out. And then eventually help your kids find community. And, so I would say that was, a big part of that.
Yeah. I feel like with all the moving around that you did and having to start over, lots of church leaders are doing the same. They may be at a place for years and God calls them away. So there's a lot of similarities, which I love. But I want to talk for a minute about some of these well, I'm just going to mention one of these resources real quick that you compiled and I got to be a part of that released this past November. And it was a devotional book called Praying Through Loneliness. It's 90 devotionals for women. And I know you reached out to me because you knew I had a story of loneliness. And mine had to do with moving to a place that was very different than I had ever experienced and then trying to fit in and along with some other things. My story has a lot to do with being unwilling to be completely vulnerable with those new people in my life. And that was a huge struggle for me. But vulnerability, we know, is very necessary for true, deep connection. Why do you think that we, or a lot of people, especially women, are so scared to share the real stuff? Like, why is it so hard to take off this mask of perfection that we wear and reveal the real to our friends around us?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's hard because we've done so and been burned when we've done so. And so therefore it kind of teaches us like, oh, we should be a little more buttoned up because this is my full me is not going to be accepted because it wasn't accepted or you have to when you're trying to get to know folks and find your people, you kind of have to test the waters a little bit, do something. And I think the benefit of getting older, like the older I get, the less I care if I do that and it's not received well. I'm like, oh, well, they're just not my people. But that's hard. And I think when you go into it and you share something like, oh, my kid has had this struggle, especially the older kids get, same thing. Their struggles get less cute. When they're little, tiny, it's like, oh, if they'd only potty train. And that's maddening when you're in the middle of it. But there's also kind of like everybody experiences that. The older they get, then, you're not necessarily experiencing every struggle. You're going to have something, but it's not going to necessarily be the same as that person's over there. So when, you mention that or try to find help as a parent with that, sometimes you're not met with understanding and empathy on that front. And so I think then it kind of teaches you to retreat a little bit. And I think too, being married to a pastor who has changed churches a couple of times, like being a military spouse, it's really tiring. Like it takes a lot of work to repeatedly put yourself out there. And you just kind of get tired and you think, do I really want to expend the energy to catch these people up on all my life? Or do I just not want to worry about it and call the friend I made at the last place and I'll just talk with her? So there's like a real, all the grace in the world for that, because it's hard to keep putting yourself out there. But the byproduct of that is loneliness. I think as much as I love the connection that social media and our phones give us, I mean, it's how I stay connected to my 3 big kids is through the phone. But you do need in-person friendships. Like that is just, it's like sitting down to a meal instead of only bread, only like appetizer plates or less. So that's some of my, kind of what I've seen and experienced and heard about.
Well, so you kind of mentioned about loneliness. So let's kind of talk about, do we go through seasons where God is drawing us into a season of loneliness? And have you been there personally? And kind of tell a little bit about your story and what God taught you through that season, and now how you're able to teach other women and men about those seasons of their life and how they can look and go, okay, I see God in this and I learned from this season.
Sure. Yeah, I do believe sometimes we are called into a season of loneliness for a purpose. I heard the late Dr. Tim Keller give this great sermon where he talks about how at the end of Genesis 2, it's written that Adam, it is not good for man to be alone. He needed a helper. And sin did not enter the world until after that. So like the world was perfect. And yet Adam was lonely. So he was not lonely because something was wrong with him. He was lonely because there was he was missing something he
Yeah.
needed that God certainly fixed when he brought Eve. And I think that is so powerful, because sometimes when we are lonely, we kind of can feel like, oh, what is wrong with me that I'm lonely? And there's nothing wrong with you. It's just pointing out that something that you're needing and you're not getting, which is some kind of connection. And so I think that has been a helpful lesson for me, while also experiencing times where I feel like the Lord does, he in my life has wanted to. I can think of a time when we lived in the Dayton, Ohio area. The second time, we were stationed there twice, but the second time, like, it just took me forever to find friends. And I remember, well, I probably saw it more in the rearview mirror after the fact, but I think the reason why I went through that time, there were several reasons, but I know one of them was he was removing distractions because he needed to work on some stuff with me. He wanted, like, my attention, and not because I can be one where, to be still and know is hard for me, and to wait on the Lord. I'll call the friend up and ask, like, process something with her. And not that that's bad. The Lord works, as Max Lucado says, the Lord works through the verse and the voice of people. So that is certainly what we're talking about, is having those people. But sometimes, I need to also be going directly to the Lord and doing that first and foremost.
Right.
And so those times of loneliness where he removed the other people, I think it better enabled me to be able to do that and be obedient in that.
I relate to that a lot. And because I think back on my time of loneliness and this happens with a lot of pastors' wives, you move into a new city, a new place. God has called you into this point where you don't know anybody. And in my situation, I went through, even though there were people all around me, there wasn't someone that I was being completely vulnerable with. And so I felt very much alone. But in that time, it's sweet for me to look back on in some ways, because I remember talking to God so much, and just crying out to him and journaling to him and praying to him. And honestly, it's probably the most prayer I've ever had in my life was during that season. And I look back on that and go, goodness, like, I need to get back to that just deep desire to be with him all the time, like that needing him, because I didn't have anyone else, like, in person to truly fully lean on, or I wasn't allowing them to be those people for me. And so I look back on that and go, okay, I see what you were doing, God, and I've learned, and here we are.
Yeah. Well, that leads me into my next question, Kristen. So Stephanie's talking about the time when she was in the thick of this loneliness, and, we know her story and how she was prostrate on the floor, like, crying out to the Lord. But what can we do, or what advice would you have for those in the thick of this loneliness when they are in those in-between times of friendship, when they have nobody?
Oh, I know. And I have been there too, Stephanie, where I am just sobbing, like ugly, full on ugly crying, like, what, where are the people? And that's, I'm laughing at that in retrospect, but it was really terrible at the time, just, it's really hard. It's really hard. I like to kind of say, three different things when you are in an intense season of loneliness. First of all, know in your heart that it is the Lord's will for you to have friends. You are not the exception to that. Jesus walked this earth with friends of various, from acquaintances to, like, the tight inner circle. And if Jesus, who was perfect, walked the earth with friends, it is his will for you and I to as well. So just keep your heart open and to the expectancy that will come in time. It just often doesn't come in the time or in the way we would like it to. But I often think, when I am going through this season, which even it's interesting, certainly as a military spouse, I went through it, but I still went through it now that I've lived in this town for a while, or in Colorado Springs for a while. I still have gone through seasons of barren friendships as well because of just people leaving, different phases in life where maybe a good friend of mine went back to work, and so therefore she just wasn't readily available as she was, or I was working. I've worked at home at least part time for a number of years, certainly even when the kids were home. So maybe I changed in availability, or parents got ill, so your availability, you got to take care of them, and that eats up at the pie of time as well. And so like that can happen as well. Even if you are a ministry spouse, a ministry wife who has been in the same area for a while, you can still be real lonely. So
sure.
I certainly know that is true. But I like to think of three things. I like to think when I'm in a season of loneliness to remember to open up, show up, and pray up. And so open up, the best tool you can do for making friends is opening up your house, because there's something about when you open up your house, you open up your heart. And I know it gets old, but listen, nobody cares about what your house looks like. They're not going to, if your house looks like a museum, they're not going to relax. So just have a bathroom clean and a place for you to sit. But like just real easy. Like I remember, when my kids were younger, I'd invite another mom over with kids and throw chicken nuggets in the oven, or we just have peanut butter and jelly, like whatever, real simple. But opening up your house is kind of like that fast track, I feel like, to making friends. And certainly not everybody I've had in my home I've become good friends with, but it's pretty much been the first step for a lot of them, or they've had me in their home. But I will say I know we've had way more people in our home than we've been invited elsewhere. So I think keeping that mindset that, you just got to go first and stop waiting, which is what I did as a brand new married. I kind of waited for people to invite me over and then got annoyed when they didn't. And listen, in a perfect world, they would do that. But although maybe ministry wives get a lot of invites, maybe you get too many invites sometimes.
Nope.
I would say it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. Everybody thinks you're already busy, or we have found that most pastors' wives will say, I don't get invites to anything. They just assume that they're busy, or the women are weird about being around them. Like they won't open up fully. It is usually the opposite.
Oh, okay. Well,
and then when we do open up and invite people, sometimes we have discovered that those pastors' wives, or like the pastors' wives who do open up and allow people to come in, it becomes a counseling session or something and not a friendship.
I could see that as well. And I would say that as you're in the military family, the military community, probably the higher up your spouse gets in rank, that probably becomes true too. There's a little more, it's more of a mentor mentee kind of a thing rather than, a friendship,
that
perhaps that often happens. So that probably does correlate. So I could see that as well. Well, then like the second thing I mentioned, show up. That is also a great tool, I think, of just showing up where there's other women. And, whether they're in your congregation or not, I mean, maybe it's preferable to not have them in your congregation, because then it's just it's just a friendship then, and it's not going to turn into like a counseling kind of a situation. But showing, like, when my kids were little, it was like Barnes and Noble story time or the library. And, now it's like at the gym. Sometimes I've struck up conversations with gals at the gym, or, just other places where you're crossing paths with women, and then just being brave enough to just say hello and just kind of have those little micro interactions that could lead to, something foundational. And then the third thing I always say is just pray up, because like we talked about earlier, the Lord wants you to have your people. It is not good for man to be alone. And you need to have that community around you. And so just praying for that, the Lord will be faithful to bring that to you. It like I said, it may not be on your timeline.
Yeah. It's good. It's so good. Okay. So, Kristen, back to the fact that you're an author. Let's take a little turn again back over to the book situation because you have another
Yes.
book releasing called Desperate Woman Seeks Friendship. I love it so much. The title is so fun. Could you maybe share with us a little bit about this project and how it can help women, even pastors' wives who are listening to this episode right now?
Absolutely. Well, so that title comes from what I talked about earlier, that second time we lived in Dayton, in the Dayton, Ohio area. We were in a suburb of Dayton, and I could not make friends. Like, I just couldn't pay people to be my friend. It seemed
Oh,
like
gosh.
I had people over. I went to mom's groups, and it was like, they just felt like sororities where I was just not, a part of the club. And I told my husband we had a marker and poster board. And this was about like 2005, so before social media. And I said, I'm going to make a sign that says "Desperate Woman Seeks Friends," and I'm going to hold it out in our yard and just see if I get any takers.
And now
my
it's your
husband
book
was
title.
like,
I know. I love it.
now it's my book title. My husband was like, "Are you really going to do that?" And I was like, "I might," because I did have the poster board and everything. So
Now you can just hold up the book.
yeah, now I can just hold up the book. Yeah,
There you
anybody can
go.
hold up the book. But yeah, so I ended up not doing it, but I was desperate enough to do it. And I think if we're honest, a lot of us are desperate for friends, desperate for our people, desperate for just somebody that we can talk to, and that we can be a light to them, and they can be a light to us. And so, so that book is releasing though in May, and the subtitle for it is real talk on connection, rejection, and trying again for the friends you need. So I get a little nervous when I think about it, because I was really vulnerable. Like, I feel like I have a huge, it's my sixth book, but I feel like the vulnerability hangover is like worse than all the others combined. So, just because I think of, for various factors, I was never the classic mean girl. Not that I couldn't say things that were mean, but I don't have a history of pattern of being the mean girl. But I do have a history of being kind of the needy one, the needy friend, and that can come across as a lot. Or I've had to really learn. Like, I really feel like I have learned how to be a good friend, and I believe I have friendships today that would be a testament to that. But it was a long road, because sometimes, we do things that kind of sabotage our efforts to make friends. And so it's not just about putting yourself out there to meet others, but also putting a healthy self out there to meet others. So when when you do have some that reject you, because rejection is a part of life, it happens.
Yeah.
You don't kind of spin to a bad place from it. You just sort of pivot and move on. So that book really goes into a lot of kind of a lot of story driven components, but also practical tools for that you can take with you in your own friendships, or attempts at friendships. So
That sounds amazing. And I think, that's just all women. And truly, it is men.
it is men too.
We talk about our husbands. Like, if we could just, they're totally okay with the way that their friendships look. But for us, like, when we look, we're like, but you're missing out on all of this,
yeah,
but
sure.
I know we are wired differently, for sure. But men out there, I think you should pick up this book in May as well.
That's right.
I think they can learn a thing too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I have a quick question for you, and then I want to just give you just the opportunity to share any other advice or anything that you would want to leave with our people. But one of the things, you talk about what a good friend is. So for you, with the studying, learning from your life, what do you, as Kristen, what do you believe, like, the good friend, what does that look like? What are the traits? What are the things that we could be better at and make sure we're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, I think, like you talked about at the very beginning, like, vulnerability is a huge thing. You have to like one of the favorite books I read in researching both Praying Through Loneliness, that devotional, and then Desperate Woman Seeks Friends was Drew Hunter's Made for Friendship. It is really good, but he talks in there about how, we treat now friendship like a cruise ship. Like we just know a little bit about a whole lot of people, and we really need to treat friendship like a submarine. Like only a few are on that boat, and you're going deep. And so that vulnerability component, and also tied in with that, what I've learned, I don't need a ton of friends. I like to think you have maybe more than one good friend, because sometimes, just with, maybe this is just my baggage, but I can overwhelm one person. So I need a couple in my history anyway. I could. So I think at least a couple of friends, so that you're not overwhelming, one of them is good, but you don't need 100 of them. I mean, none of us can be actual friends with 100 people anyway. You're not really friends with them. You're just acquaintances, or you're friendly. But I would say, to change the idea of the number of friends you need, you only need a couple, but you have to be willing to go deep with them. And I think what's real important these days is because what I'm seeing is there's a less of a regard for, I mean, you could say loyalty or maybe faithfulness in friendship. The friend does one thing that ticks you off and you just write them off forever. And, there's
like cancel culture.
Cancel culture. Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, and not that, there doesn't need to be repentance and forgiveness and wisdom and all of that. But sometimes there's also just garden variety mistakes that this is just a part of being with people, and you're going to rub each other the wrong way. And if you're going to kick them to the curb every time they do something wrong, then you're just going to be cycling through people left, right, and center. And that's not a healthy way to see it either. The grass is not always greener, over it, it never is. Like they say, it's, what is it? It's greener where you water it. But so I would say also a loyalty, but some people don't like loyalty, I mean, because again, I'm not saying loyal in terms of the mafia or, if they turn toxic, then you got to step back. There's that, there's levity with that, but generally like a sense of faithfulness to that friend, and to care for her and for her name, whether you're in her presence or not.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
So good.
So good. Now, to end, is there anything else that you want to say? Just anything about the books or anything about friendship, or just anyone that might be going through a time of loneliness, or they're just getting their feet wet and starting friendships? Just anything you want to leave with them.
Well, I would say if you think it's hard, that means you're doing it right, because it is hard. Making friends is hard because it's hard, not because there's something wrong with you. I am really proud of both those resources, the devotional. Stephanie, your devos were fantastic in there. It's just such a great resource that no matter what you're going through, what circumstances threw you into a season of loneliness, this book will speak to you. And then the trade book that's releasing in May is just a real deep dive into how to really have the community you want to have. And I would say though, that for the woman, the ministry wife who's lonely right now and listening to this podcast, I would tell her to take heart. The way it is now won't be the way it is forever. And while she waits for her to find her people and for her community to look like, what she would like it to be, that Jesus is her always faithful friend who walks with her through everything. And he is with her today. She is never alone. And the Lord will direct her to her people. But right now, today, she is not alone. She is beloved. She is his daughter. She's his treasure. And he is with her and will be with her as he brings her to the friends she needs and deserves.
That's good. That's good.
That's so good. Thank you so much, Kristen. We all appreciate you so much. And I know that there will be so many people who listen to this and they will gain so much knowledge and wisdom from you. So we ask 3 questions at the end of every podcast episode, if you are familiar with listening to us, but we're going to change them up just a little bit since you're not a pastor's wife. So are you ready for these 3 questions?
It's rapid fire.
I'm ready.
Rapid fire. Here we go.
Okay.
If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
To relax. Ain't nobody thinking about you like you think they are.
Oh my gosh,
good.
yes.
That's great.
That's really good.
That's a shirt. That's a shirt right there.
I like it. I'd
I
wear
love
it.
it.
Okay. Second question. What do you do by yourself or with your spouse to get your mind off of work and just all your to-dos? Like, what do you do for fun?
I sound like I'm 100, but I drink tea and read magazines. I love to flip through Country Living with my black tea, with some creamer.
Oh.
That I just love to sit.
Look at that. She
So-
likes tea.
She loves tea.
We spilled the tea on Thursdays.
We sure
And
do.
Jenna and I drink tea as well.
We sure do.
Yeah.
I like
Oh.
cinnamon tea.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, me too. I love cinnamon tea. I
It
love
is
it.
really
So yeah,
good.
I sound 100, but that is what I
Yeah.
love.
We're here
No,
for it.
We like it. No judgment here. We're there with you. Okay, so last question. If you could tell the Big C Church anything without reservation and have them really listen and respond, what would you say to them?
Oh, that is a good question. I would say not. I've never ever been asked this in my whole life. I would say, I would say to listen, value, and esteem the women in your congregation. Lift them up. Believe them when they say, this is something we see that's missing that we need. So,
Oh.
Yeah.
That's good, girl.
So,
Very
and
good.
I will say, I feel like my church does a good job of that. Just if somebody's listening there, this isn't
Oh, yeah. Big
it's
C
not
Church.
a hidden
Big C.
like
We
Not-
get it.
Big C.
Not your local church.
Not Kristen's church if you're out there.
Big
But
church
hello.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Kristen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was just a joy, and it was so good to see your face and talk with you today.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Can I add one little thing to that
Yeah.
question that you just
Do it.
asked?
Of course.
I just because of my history, I would say also to just really value and look for ways to be there for the military community in your church as well.
yeah.
That's good.
That's they're in and out. They're a wonderful resource. They usually jump in and volunteer quickly.
Yes,
Just
they
go
do.
the extra mile to appreciate them. Go the extra mile to appreciate them.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Good.
Good advice. Good advice. Well, guys, we love you out there, and we pray that the words that Kristen talked about today really touch you and let you know also you're not alone, even if you're in a season of loneliness, and
That's
that it's not forever. And also, we will put in the show notes about Kristen's resources and books coming out in May. So we're excited about it, Kristen. So thank you so much. And until next time.
Bye for now.
Okay, friends, if you have enjoyed this episode as much as we have, please help us spread the word on Facebook and Instagram.
If you didn't know yet, Instagram is where all the fun is at. From dance reels on Wednesdays to spiritual encouragement and laugh out loud posts in between, there is something for everyone.
And last but certainly not least, if you could take a moment right now to stop what you're doing and give us a rating and review, even subscribe to our podcast, this seriously helps other people find us who wouldn't be able to otherwise. Thank you so much for your love and support. We hope you'll tune in next week.